The Honda Rebel 300 and 500 have been massively popular bikes, but does their big brother, the CMX1100, have what it takes to mix it with the big boys? For a lot of cruiser riders, image is everything, and it has to be a V-twin with a belt drive. It has to have the look, and I totally get that, and for those people, this bike is not going to appeal. There are also cruiser riders that just want something comfortable and reliable to nip out on a sunny day, and that's where bikes like the CMX1100 come in. It's another model in the range that utilises the 1084cc parallel twin first seen in the Africa Twin, and although this engine might not have the looks, it's a suitable power plant for the big Rebel. Power and torque have both been cut on this motor, with it producing 85 horsepower and 98 newton meters of torque, but it does do that much lower down the rev range. The torque particularly hitting its peak at 4,750 revs as opposed to 6,250 as it does in the Africa Twin tune. This of course is much more suitable for this type of bike, and it's very evident when you ride it, but we'll see more of that in the on the road section. This is the DCT version of the bike, and it comes in at £10,399 on the road. The manual version is a little bit cheaper at £9,499. Personally, I think the DCT is perfect for this type of bike. After all, a cruiser is all about taking it easy, surely. It does obviously add some cost, and it adds some weight too. This DCT bike weighs in at 233 kilograms curb weight compared to the manual version, which is just 223 kilograms. But having said that, those weights are pretty good in this market segment. The bike does carry its weight low too, and with this 700mm seat height, it's a very easy bike to maneuver around when you're not riding it. It's also pretty nimble on the road too, but more on that later. The round LCD speedo is clear and full of information. The switchgear is also high quality, and the lack of a big TFT screen means that they've been able to be simplified as well. Showa suspension takes care of the bumps, and it is adjustable, but only for preload front and rear. The tank looks small, but it does hold 13.6 litres, which should give a range of around 150 miles. And the blacked out exhaust is a little on the large size, but it does sound pretty good for a stock pipe. To give it that custom feel, the ignition is on the left side of the bike. This key also allows for the removal of the seat, where you'll find a USB-C socket. I think it's a very nice looking bike, but of course you don't buy a bike just to look at it, so what's it like to ride? So all that technical stuff is very good, but we're now out on the road where it really matters to see just how this bike stacks up as a cruiser. And I'll start where I normally start, which is with ergonomics. Now when I first jumped on this bike, it did feel a little bit cramped, and that's really because I'm not used to riding that many cruisers. The seat is kind of what you'd expect. It's relatively soft, but it is a small seat. You haven't really got a lot of room on it, and in this riding position I find that it puts a little bit of weight on my coccyx. You can kind of budge around on it a little bit, so that's not too bad, but again, having forward pegs would alleviate that problem. So it is reasonably comfortable, but once you've been riding for about an hour and a half, I found that I kind of wanted to get off and have a little of a stretch and give my butt rest. One other thing I've noticed, which can be changed with a little bit of adjustment, I find that rear brake a little bit high. If I've got my foot on the pegs as I want them, I'm kind of, my toe is on that brake, and I'm having to kind of lift my foot up a little bit, so I sit with my foot kicked out a little bit to try to counter that, but as I say, a little bit of adjustment on that brake just to put the lever down a bit would solve that problem. But all in all, it's kind of what you'd expect from a cruiser with mid controls. The seat height is obviously low, right, it's easy to manoeuvre, it carries its weight down low, so it's not really that much of a problem, nice and balanced. Looking at the suspension, the Showa does a good job. Those front forks are pretty compliant, as is the rear, but obviously you haven't got a lot of travel, and sometimes you do notice that. On nice smooth roads it's not a problem. I've been taking it down sort of bumpy lanes with mixed surfaces, and yeah, it still does a pretty good job for what it is. I wouldn't expect it to be super plush and super smooth. We haven't got a lot of travel to play with, but it does a pretty good job. But if you do hit a pothole or a ridge in the road that you're not expecting, you do get a bit of a jolt up your backside. Now obviously it's not a bike you're going to be pushing really hard in the corners, but you can get a lean on and you can have a lot of fun with it. So as I've already mentioned, this bike is the DCT and it works just the same as the system on the other bikes. You've got pretty much the same modes. You have on here standard, which I'm in at the moment, flick the select key, you've got sport, user, so you can configure that yourself, and rain. So let's give you a quick demonstration. We're in standard, first gear, pull away, and it short shifts its way through the box very quickly. So that standard mode shifts very early into higher gears, and it's meant to be the most economical and the kind of smoothest ride, but you can still control it using these paddle shifters without messing the setting, if that makes sense. So if you want to go from 6th gear to 5th gear, press down on here, but it hasn't put it into manual, it's literally just changed down the gear and it's gone back up into 6th there. So you have got that control over it, and you'll do that in each of the modes, so that if you do find that this is a little bit sluggish, so for this has been great riding around, but now we're starting to get into the twistier lanes where I'm going to be slowing down and speeding up more, that may not be the best mode to go in, because it's going to be slower to change down and to change up. So here coming into the bend, I'm slowing down. It's kept it in 6th actually until 40s, but if I wanted to, I can bang it down to 5th or 4th. You can put it into just pure manual mode, so you've just got the 2 buttons here, up and down, and it won't change itself. Well, the mode that I use more frequently, particularly for roads like this, is to put it into sport, and you can see there already jumped down a gear, and this will now hold on to the gears for much longer, and it will change down much quicker. So already it's much more of a lively ride. Less labouring of the engine. But here we go from 5th, it hasn't even gone up into 6th there, so 5th gear, braking for this corner, and bang, it's straight down into 2nd, so I'm ready to come out of there. So on twisty roads like this, if you want to ride it with a bit more vigour, then the sport mode is good, and it still shows on the screen the power, the traction control and the electronic braking, the levels that they're at. And in the user mode you can just set each one of those exactly how you want it. But for a cruiser this handles pretty well, it handles very well actually. Okay, the suspension's not the most sophisticated, but the brakes are good, but those big fat tyres give you plenty of confidence. It's pretty grippy. Obviously it's got a kicked out front end a little bit, it's pretty slack in the steering head angle, but because the bike's still relatively compact in terms of overall dimensions, you can hustle it around if you want to, and it doesn't really get itself in a pickle, it doesn't get itself crossed up, it just deals with it very well indeed. I think we've got a good engine note from that motor. It's always put out a good sound, and I guess if you put an aftermarket pipe on there, that's going to sound even better. There you go, hard on the brakes and it's boom down into 2nd gear for you. It really is a lot of fun. See, it holds onto the gear for quite a long time there, and as you get to ride it you get to learn it a little bit more. So if you do want to dump it down a gear, just a bit of more aggressive braking on the way into the corner and it anticipates that and goes down a gear. It's a good system. It's not for everybody obviously, but if you haven't tried it then I would urge you to give it a go. You might just find that you enjoy it. because of the DCT, and that's the thing that Honda do well with this bike, because you haven't got a clutch to feather, it's important that you've got a really nice, gentle throttle. And this is quite progressive. You have to turn it a fair way before you start to get the power coming through, and then it's kind of a bit more progressive the more you wind it on, if that makes sense. I'm trying to think of a better way to describe it. So it's not snatchy, and it gives you really good slow speed manoeuvrability. But yeah, if you're down cruising the beach fronts, what more relaxing way you could do it. In fact, with the DCT, you can eat an ice cream as you're going along. I'm kidding, of course. You'd never get it through the visor without making a mess, would you? One thing I have noticed about the DCT setup on this though is in sport mode it's not quite as smooth as the Africa Twin setup. You can see there you get a bit of hesitancy where it feels like it's going to try to change down and it doesn't, which is why using the standard mode I think around town or manually doing it is much better. But sometimes when you're not expecting it, it will a little bit. So, but as I say, if you're riding around town, you don't need it in sport mode. Styling is very subjective, so it's probably not even worth talking about. I quite like the look of this bike. A lot of people don't, and that's fair enough. One thing I do like is this colour. When it was initially wheeled out of the van, I was like, oh, it's brown. In the sun now, I don't know if you can see, it's got a beautiful sparkle to it. The brakes are good, nothing really much to say about the brakes. They do what they need to do. Because it's a DTT, you still have a handbrake, so you've got this little lever here that you just pull and lock to lock it into place, because obviously you can't leave the bike in gear. The bike comes with cruise control as standard, which makes sense. It's a cruiser. Why wouldn't you have cruise control? You get the words character and soul, and quite often having a bike with soul means that it's maybe mechanically a little bit more agricultural, but it's got soul. But I think a lot of bikes, even modern bikes, can have character, and this engine does have its own particular character. And this is very much a modern Japanese cruiser. They're not trying to ape anything, they're not trying to kind of copy a Harley or an Indian. They've just built a very practical, what I think is a nice looking, comfortable, usable cruiser. So if you're the sort of rider where image is super important, and you know it's got to be a Harley or it's got to be an Indian, and that suits the aesthetic that you're going for, then yeah, this is not the bike for you. But if you just want a really nice, comfortable, fun bike to cruise around on sunny days, then this certainly fits the bill. So I think I've covered off most of what I can say about this bike, to be honest. If you've got any questions, then leave those in the comment section down below. Obviously a like and a subscribe would be greatly appreciated. And all of those would say is, until next time, thanks for watching, take care, ride safe, and I'll see you soon. Bye.